Ahoy there folks, I'm Captain Benzie and welcome back to another video for EVE Online. Now, today I wanted to talk about the multi-boxing problem, and we're going to talk about what multi-boxing is, what the problem I'm referring to actually is, and kind of where we go from there with it. Now, before we go any further in this one, I don't have any good footage. I've had a corrupted hard drive to deal with. I need to get myself a new one. Payday is next week, so that's why I'm struggling to make content right now. Great fun. Thank you for bearing with me whilst I go through these very troubling and dark times. But essentially what this means is that for today, you're just going to be staring at a ship docked in Jita. Yay, aren't you lucky? So just treat this like a podcast and we'll talk about what I've got to say, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this in the comment section down as well, because obviously this is a point of consternation with a lot of the community. I've got my opinions, I'm sure you have yours, and I'd love to hear them politely worded in the comment section down below, but do remember, if you're rude and abusive and aggressive, those comments are just going to be deleted, so try and keep it civil, try and keep it fun. We're all part of this great community together. Let's talk about it, let's have fun. So, we're talking about the multi-boxing problem. First of all, what is multi-boxing? For those who don't know, you might be new to EVE Online, you might have heard of this term, you might not necessarily understand exactly what it means. Well, EVE Online is an MMO, right? It's a massively multiplayer online game. I'm not going to say it's an MMORPG, I think it's an MMO space simulator, but there we go. The point is, it is massively multiplayer online. And a lot of the things that you can do in the game are designed around you doing them in a fleet. A lot of the processes in the game are designed around you doing part of the process and theoretically handing off the rest to someone else. Now, with industrialism, you can kind of do this on one account. If you have one account where one character is, for example, a miner, he goes off out and harvests the materials, brings them back. You've had another character training up into reprocessing at the same time. You've been using MCT, so you only have to pay for a mega once. And you use that to essentially take all that mining material, send it across to a second character who then reprocess it, and then you send it to a third character who then turns the reprocessed materials into actual sellable goods via the manufacturing process, right? So you've got three guys all on the same account doing like a chain of command kind of thing, like, you know, going a chain of process. So one person harvests, the other person reprocesses, and the third one manufactures. It means that you don't necessarily have to wait for one character to have fully trained mining, reprocessing, and manufacturing. You can be training them side by side. Multi-boxing is like this, but taken to a whole new level. By splitting the characters across multiple accounts, you don't have to worry about MCT, but you do have to worry, obviously, about making sure that all those accounts have Omega if they need, but you might find they don't all need Omega. Now, the big advantage of this splitting across multiple accounts is that if you set it up right and you have a good enough computer in order to run it properly, you can theoretically have multiple instances of EVE Online open at once. Which means rather than, for example, you needing 3 or 4 ships to run a particularly difficult combat site, for example, you might actually decide, rather than having friends come with you, that you're just going to have 3 or 4 instances of EVE Online open, and you will just manually control all 4 ships on 4 separate screens doing the thing. This can be very useful for mining, for example. You might have 5 or 6 characters all trained in things like, say, a retriever, or something like that, and you just launch all 5 of those characters into the same mining belt, you strip mine with them, and then you warp off, and you've got essentially all the materials as if 5 people had been playing. The benefits of this are that obviously you can get a lot more done. The downside of this is obviously you need to have multiple accounts set up, you need to have a mega on any of those accounts if they need it, and there's a certain level of micromanaging involved. And this is where I want to tangent aside briefly, because I think multi-boxing can get a really bad name sometimes. Some people look at it very aggressively as almost cheating in EVE Online, because you're doing something as one person that would normally require an entire fleet to do. And I would say that, especially since in Catskull we nearly lost our station to one guy piloting 8 different ships through multi-boxing. He had an entire fleet combat situation set up that damn near defeat our actual purpose-built defense fleet. So there is a certain level of skill involved in multiboxing. There is a certain level of ability required in order to theoretically make this work. I mean, you could kind of create a script that means when you click warp on one character, it multiplies out across all the others and they all warp, but that's a surefire way to get yourself banned because CCP are very good at picking up on scripts and automation. So just don't do that, right? So the benefits of multiboxing are essentially, for want of a slightly politer way of putting it, you're making up for the fact that you don't have other players around you to do the thing. This can be really beneficial if you're in wormholes, for example. You can have your main running the combat site whilst an alt sits cloaked up on the connections, watching what's going on. You don't need to have another player bored out of their brackets staring at a wormhole. You can do it yourself through multiboxing. If you wanted to run Abyssal Dead Spaces in, say, two destroyers, you just set up 2 instances of the multiboxing accounts, and you can run that on yourself without having to split the loot between you and a friend. You, as a player, are theoretically getting 100% of the loot. The downside is that, naturally, it's quite difficult to set up, and it can be quite finicky to run. So that's what multiboxing is, and we've talked a little bit there that some people find this quite the point of controversy, and that's the multiboxing problem to me. I don't think multiboxing itself is a problem. I genuinely don't. I think that the perception of multiboxing is the problem. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, the main argument against multiboxing is that, and I am quoting here because this is not something I agree with, oh, it's just a bunch of sweaty gamer nerds that don't have any friends and they're off out there doing all of this stuff that a normal player can't do. It's not fair. They've got a bigger rig than me. They've got a better computer than me. I wish I could multibox, but I just don't have the money to buy that many accounts, and I don't have the money to buy a computer that can do it. Which, to me, honestly, when you break it down like that, sounds a lot like jealousy rather than anything else, but let's put that aside for the moment. The other side of it is that some people do have a genuine, I agree, argument that the way that this is set up is theoretically outside of CCP's original design process, and because we now have monetization in the ways of Omega being account bound and then MCT for individual characters, that when you are doing, CCP will kind of turn a blind eye to multiboxing because it makes them money, which, yes, of course it does. But equally, good multiboxing, you shouldn't be able to tell if it's one person controlling 8 accounts or 8 players each controlling 1 account. And that right there is why I personally don't have an issue with multiboxing. Because 8 accounts being run by 1 player, when they're all online at the same time and doing those things, there is no functional difference, in my eyes at least, between 8 accounts being controlled by 1 player and 8 accounts being controlled by 8 players. It's still 8 ships in space. What multiboxing does, and I know it comes across as an unkind way of saying it, but it makes up for the fact that you don't have friends to do those things. Like in Catskull, I'm lucky that there are people who are quite happy to sit and stare at a wormhole for an hour, knowing that they'll get paid for it at the end of the day. We have people who are quite happy to just undock a roll a wormhole, and then dock back up and sit and chat on Discord for a bit. Not everyone has access to that. And if you don't have access to that, then multiboxing accounts that allow you to do those things is a way to go forward with that, right? I get it. I genuinely get it. I don't want to sit there and say, oh, multiboxers are sweaty losers who have no friends. No, I know plenty of multiboxers. We've got some in Catskull who are amazing people who will undock 8 hulks at once and go off mining and, then bring it all back. And it really benefits the corp. Of course it does. It's the equivalent of having 8 players go out and do the mining stuff at once. It's really cool. They're good people. They're not losers. They're just playing the game on a different level to everyone else. And this is the point, I think, that so many people get so upset by multiboxing that, it's changed the whole design position with EVE Online. And I don't agree with that. I don't, because I think if theoretically you had someone with good enough skills, you could multibox any multiplayer game. Like, if you had someone who was actively capable of running 2 keyboards, 2 mice, and 2 computers, they could theoretically duo an arena in World of Warcraft if they were good enough. It's much harder, I'd argue. EVE Online, by its nature, works quite nicely with being able to kind of click something, let it do the thing for a little bit, go off and do something else, and then come back. It's easier to manage multiple accounts at once, is my point. And I don't think that's a problem. The biggest part of the problem is that I think a lot of new players come into the game and look at multiboxing, and they've been told that this is a thing that goes on, and if they don't have 5 accounts, they can't compete. Well, okay, I'm sitting on a Jita alt at the moment, but I actually only really play on 1 account. I'm a content creator for EVE Online, and I play on 1 character. Yes, that character is skilled into every single sub-capital ship in the game at this point at full Mastery 5. Not everyone's going to have that. But equally, when I'm flying around in a Loki, does it matter that I have full Tengu skills? If I'm using a projectile Loki, does any of the skills that apply to my missile Tengu actually matter? No, I've just got a lot more versatility than other players, but now we're getting into the skill point discussion. What I want to get at here is that theoretically, it is absolutely possible to do every single piece of content in the game with one account. Just in some cases, you're going to need friends to be there with you. Talking about things like capital ratting in a C6 wormhole, for example, you can theoretically do it solo. It's much better to have people around you watching the holes and the connections, and you might not be lucky enough to have people around you who are willing to do that. Therefore, you may need to multibox. Multiboxing definitely has its benefits. I'm not going to deny that. But I do think multiboxing is ultimately, when you break it right the way down, unnecessary. It is not required. You can play EVE Online and have fun without multiboxing. It is not a requirement, and I think that there is a certain misconception amongst newer players that multiboxing is absolutely required. If you want to be hyper-competitive, if you want to earn the most ISK in the game, yeah, probably you are going to need to multibox. You can't rely on people eating into your profits from the sides like that, but I'd argue that's not how the game's meant to be played. Therefore, yeah, you get the imaginary ISK high score, but what's that really worth? To me, if I had a choice of sitting in a mining belt with 7 friends or controlling 8 ships and mining it all for myself, I'd rather do the mining belt with 7 friends and sit and chat to them on Discord. I get that you can absolutely do both. You could have 16 of you in a mining belt, 8 random people, and then one guy controlling 8 accounts sitting in Discord talking. And that to me is fine. That's ideal. So I think there's that misconception that multiboxing is necessary, and I just don't agree that it is. I think everything in this game that you might want to multibox can also be done just with a fleet. You just need to find people who are willing to do the other bits of the quote-unquote multiboxing experience for you. If you want to be C6 ratting in a dreadnought and you need eyes on all the wormholes, yeah, it's beneficial to have a load of alts on separate accounts that you can just set up yourself and watch on separate screens. But you can also do that with other players. It might be beneficial to have someone scout down the wormholes and then someone who rage rolls them to find one that's for you. And you could theoretically have 2 accounts that do that while your guy sits docked up in his dreadnought ready to go ratting. You could also just have 2 corp mates who do it for you. That's my point. I don't think that multiboxing actually does anything in the game that a standard player can't do with friends, with the right friends. So I don't see multiboxing as a problem, but I do see its perception to new players as a problem. There was a conversation on Reddit today, which is actually what inspired this video, of a new player who, according to the original post, has been in the game, 5 months? And he's wondering if he should stick around because he's heard that multiboxing is necessary and he can't multibox. His computer isn't good enough for that and he's not sure he can afford the multiple accounts. No. You don't need to multibox to have fun. You can have fun on a single account. Unless your fun is being able to harvest an entire belt on your own in 30 seconds. But, you know, that's kind of the trade-off, right? There's plenty of things to do in EVE Online that you can do on your own or with a corp. And in my eyes, multiboxing's only advantage is that it basically allows you to replace other players that would be fleeted with you with yourself. That's kind of it. That's the only advantage, really, to multiboxing. If you've got people who are willing to do all of the bits that you want to multibox, then you don't need to multibox. You can get away with just fleeting up and having those people around you. But I don't know. And I think there is the other part of the multiboxing problem is absolutely just its perception with players. How angry some people get at this. How divisive this is a topic. That some people genuinely get so upset when you announce that, oh yeah, I multibox across 8 accounts. They're like, oh my god, you're the reason that EVE's dying. Yeah, the 20-year-old game is dying, right? Let's ignore the fact that it's doing better now than it's done in a long time. It's on an upswing, the content's amazing, the community's been thriving, but EVE's dying, right? EVE's been dying since 2005, right? That's the meme. That's the meme. EVE isn't dying, and if it were, it wouldn't be multiboxing that's killing it by a long shot. It just simply wouldn't be. Like, who cares? Who genuinely cares that one guy controlling 30 accounts is, like, you know, running everything? If you can log in and have fun, that doesn't impact you, does it? If you can log in and have fun, who gives a flying fuck what that guy's doing? Like, let him have his fun. If he wants to pay for 30 accounts of Omega, that's supporting the devs. Oh, but he buys the Omega for free with ISK. Yeah, but where does the Plex come from? Someone had to buy the Plex for him to be able to buy it with ISK, which means he's supporting the Plex process, which means he's making the devs money, and he's making more than if he were actually swiping, because Plex for Omega is worth more than just swiping for Omega directly. So yeah, there's all of that. Multiboxing, in my opinion, it's a natural part of EVE. You're never going to get rid of it. There is literally no way you can physically get rid of it. If you think the developers haven't thought, well, is there a way we could get rid of multiboxing and sort of force people to fleet up as separate individual players? You can bet your bottom dollar they've thought through all the options, and it's just not going to work. It's not. It's part of EVE's inherent design that this is possible, and I just don't see it as a problem. But I think that anger and that hatred that some people have towards it can be a problem. I think that the perception that multiboxing is somehow necessary to the game is equally a problem. When you're telling new people that, oh, you need to be prepared to multibox. One of the things that really surprised me in that Reddit thread, by the way, was a couple of people saying, oh, many of the major elite organizations require you to multibox. I'll tell you what, if I weren't in Catskull, which in my opinion is one of the greatest corporations I've ever seen in EVE Online, if I weren't in Catskull and I was applying for a corporation and they said, oh, sorry, we really like you and we'd love you to be on board, but since you don't multibox, we're not willing to have you. What that says to me is that corp is saying, we don't have enough players to actually do content, so we need you to basically pretend to be 10 players at once. That's batshit crazy, right? When you put it that way, that is crazy. I can have fun on one account. Why am I required to have 10? Because you morons think that is absolutely necessary? That you guys aren't happy with my ability to play the game on one account. You need me to have 8 accounts. Why? Why? I genuinely don't get it. Like, again, we've got people in Catskull who are quite happy to sit and stare at a wormhole for a few hours and get paid for the luxury. They sit in Discord, we have a great chat, we shoot the shit, and we just laugh and have a great time. So, saying to people, oh, you can't join our wormholing corp unless you've got an alt that you can sit on the wormholes. Why? If I'm happy to do that on my main, why do I need the alt? Like, that's my point here. That's my point. That the multiboxing problem isn't multiboxing. It's how people react to it. The anger and hatred it inspires in some people, and this weird obsession with it that the other people have. Like, this is a video game, people. We're here to have fun. We're here to log in and fly internet spaceships in one of the coolest settings, I think, in, like, modern culture. I'm not even just saying in gaming there. I think New Eden as a background and lore is one of the coolest things in just recent creation. I think that is an incredible IP. We're here to have fun with this. So why would you gatekeep that by telling people they need to do this unnecessary thing, or that you won't have them part of your group unless they do this unnecessary thing, or that they shouldn't even bother if they can't do this unnecessary thing? And why would you get angry that other people are doing this unnecessary thing? Like, yeah, stop playing EVE as a competition. If you're sitting there going, well, this guy harvests more ore than I do because he's got 8 ships, is your sense of worth tied to how much ore you can harvest per hour? Because if it is, like, you know, I'm a nerd, right? But get a hobby. Go outside and touch grass. If your self-perception is attached to how much ore you can harvest, and if someone else can do better than you, you feel awful. Get a hobby. Anyway, folks, that's it from me today. Bit of a controversial one. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on this because it is a controversial subject. I think there are some interesting discussions that I've just touched on the tip of. Because to me, those are the main points, but you might have some other points that you think are worth talking about. Drop in the comment section down below. I'd love to get a discussion going on this. Come and join the Catskull Discord. Become a member of the channel. Support me on Patreon. Support me on PayPal. You know all of the jig by now. Otherwise, folks, thank you for listening. Stay kind to each other. Be excellent, Bill and Ted style. Happy sailing, and see you in New Eden.